Welcome back to the Heart Program podcast. Heart is a mental wellness consultancy. What was the line that we just said?
We teach, coach, and champion skills-based approach to mental health and thriving in life.
Which, full disclosure, is something that we, as a description of what we do, something that we just came up with after more than a year of trying to figure out how to explain our work to an audience who's unfamiliar with the kind of stuff that we do. Right. So, today on episode 3, thank you for your patience and listening to that intro. Today on episode 3 of our podcast, we are going to be talking about stigma and mental health and what the challenges are for individuals to talk about it, why people are afraid to talk about it, why it gets stigmatized, and most importantly, how we can start flipping that narrative around the other way to have it be something that we can talk about commonly, just like we do cardio or physical fitness training so that our backs don't hurt. So, do we have a definition of stigma?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, stigma is when we shun, ostracize, or treat differently, basically discriminate against, in a negative way, a certain group of people, i.e. people with mental health issues, as less good than people without those mental health issues.
Okay.
So it's a fairly simple definition, and there's some components of it, including social stigma versus self-stigma. So social stigma would be when, as a society, we do this, in large groups, and we view certain populations as less good as the rest of the population, and then we have some perceptions of them as being dangerous or something that we have to fear, and so we avoid them. And that would be, kind of what we do as a societal level. And then self-stigma is when we internalize those ideas, and we then feel shame or guilt ourselves, and we avoid or restrict our behavior on the basis of what we're afraid that the society is going to think or say. Yeah, so that would be self-stigma.
That's a pretty good definition. Yeah. And I think in some ways, kind of the expansion on that is that, parents who are concerned about their kids' futures, certainly we've heard them talk to us about how they don't want anybody to think of their kid as having any kind of a mental health problem because they see that as having potential long-term negative impact.
Yeah, I mean, that to an extreme. Like we've had parents say to us that even though their student participated as an intern to help other students, they didn't want their student's name to be associated with a mental health based program because they were afraid that, when the student went into industry, other people would assume they had some sort of mental health problem, and that would be held against them. So that's how deep the stigma goes,
right.
Yeah? That you would be afraid that somebody helping out people actually had a problem and were, less good because of it.
Right. Which is crazy considering all of the celebrities who are doing incredibly well in the world, and at the same time, they are very out about their mental health challenges. And
yeah, I think the world kind of views celebrities with a grain of salt, and whilst they have a lot of influence and sway and they're very visible, sometimes people don't view celebrities as reality.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Because they don't really always represent reality.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah. I guess to me, I always think of them as just being humans with particular skills and that, I don't have per se. I can't sing, so I'm not taking over Lady Gaga's role.
Yeah, but just like humans with other particular skills, you're not an actuary.
That's
So
true.
You don't crunch numbers. So that doesn't make Hollywood or, the music industry more real than insurance.
Right. Yeah, I guess for me, at the end of the day, anybody and everybody has the potential to struggle with their mental health.
Oh, yeah.
And
well, of course, the issue here is not that mental health doesn't affect everybody, because we know that mental health does. It affects everybody from all walks of life, all cultures, all genders, all races, all socioeconomic levels and backgrounds. And interestingly, there's this misperception here in the States that we're particularly bad when it comes to stigma about mental health. And actually, as a country, we're much more open and supportive about mental health than most other countries, and especially other countries that are maybe more traditional in their societies.
oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so when we have cultural differences here in the States with stigma, it often happens. Well, the place that I see it a lot is where you have a family member who might be a first generation of a particular culture, and they're grown up here in the States, and they might be more open and wanting to talk about mental health, but the parents and the rest of the family might have come from a very traditional society where they don't talk about mental health, or where it is more stigmatized. And so there's a conflict between how much do we talk about it, how much do we support the person, how do we do it, in a way that makes everybody feel supported and not uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. So, I guess for me, one of the questions is always, and full disclosure, I've been thinking about this and in conversations about this for a long time. But I always wonder, how do we broach, what is a safe, not so scary door to open with someone who is concerned about that stigma, to get them or someone they care about, if they're the case of the parent, how do we open the door for them to move down a productive path and not trigger their fear of this kind of conversation?
Yeah. Well, I think in order to do that, we have to have some understanding of where the stigma comes from and why, and that way we can kind of treat the root cause. You like to talk about root cause analysis. Well,
definitely.
It's hard to have a solution when you don't understand the root cause. So what are the root causes of stigma? Where does it come from? A lot of it is misunderstanding or myths that feed into fear and negative perceptions and ideas around mental health. So what are some of those myths? One predominant one is that a person with a mental health issue can't recover, can't be fully independent, can't be, productive, happy, stable, all of that, right? Have a good life and thrive because of their mental health condition. And so that causes parents especially a lot of fear and worry, and the idea that we don't want to let that get out, because it'll taint that person's prospects in the future. But, that's one of the myths. We can't recover. Another myth is that people with mental health issues are violent and unpredictable. And this is an interesting one, because I saw this in regular health. So I used to be a phlebotomist for the VA, and one of the VAs that I worked at, an individual who was training me to draw blood from patients in the behavioral health ward, basically the locked psych facility, taught me that I should be careful around those patients, because you don't know what they're going to do. You shouldn't ever turn your back to them. Don't look them in the eye. Don't smile at them. don't engage them because you don't know what they're going to do. And so this was a perfect example of, the fear and misperception that these individuals are violent and unpredictable, and they could do something that would harm you, and all of that. And then after I worked there, and I wound up working in mental health in a locked facility, locked behavioral health facility, I learned that most people with mental health issues are not violent towards other people. They may be, violent or harmful towards themselves, which is part of the reason why they're in a locked facility, because they're in grave danger of not being able to care for themselves, or, dysfunctional in that way, or harmful to themselves directly. Or if they're emotionally charged towards somebody, it's usually when it's somebody close to them who they're distressed about, right? Who is, in their eyes, has hurt them, and so they have this emotion, and that's where the violence comes from, right? But it doesn't tend to be towards other people.
It doesn't bleed out.
No.
Yeah. Mm-mm. Yeah.
And the majority of people that are challenged with mental health issues are challenged more with what we call mood disorders, where they're depressed, anxious, they're struggling with those kinds of, mood disorders, as opposed to something more organic or fundamental or extreme, intense.
Right. So back to the question of what are the, and I will admit freely that I'm leading the witness in this, what kind of approach can we use to help improve the quality of life for people who aren't necessarily clinical, but all of us are going to have struggles somewhere along the way, in some way, shape, or form, because that's the nature of life. So how do we start to crack the door open and start to talk about things in such a way that it's not scary, and people don't feel the need to stigmatize as a way of avoiding the conversation?
Okay, so that's a really long and complex question. I'm going to have to pick it apart in pieces.
Sure.
Right? If I remember correctly, because I didn't write it down, you started with something like, how do we crack open the door and allow people to support people's engagement in the discussion early on? And the main point around that is, just like any other health issue, mental health, just like physical health, is better when treated early. We know that most people, and I don't have the statistics at the tip of my tongue, unfortunately, and I didn't write them down in advance. Most people do better, much better, if their issue is addressed earlier on rather than later. I mean, like, perfect example would be stage 1 cancer versus stage 4 cancer, right? If you catch it earlier, you have a much better chance of prognosis, much better chance of improvement and survival. Mental health is the same. The earlier you address the issues, the better the person's chance is of surviving, thriving, developing healthy habits and strategies. And, it's, I suppose part of mental health stigma comes from the idea that some of the issues around mental health can potentially be lifestyle choices. I'll give you an example. Diabetes, in part, we know, comes from lifestyle choices, right? What you choose to eat, how you choose to spend your time, how much you move and exercise, how much you check your health, all of those things, including some level of genetics, because there is definitely a level of what you were born with and what you grow up with influences, your health in the current and the future. Same thing with mental health. what you were
Sure.
born with, right? When you were in your mother's womb, if she suffered from certain stressors, that's going to change your brain chemistry and give you certain predilections towards mental health issues. What you grow up with, if you're surrounded by people who are coping with anxious feelings or depressive behaviors, those environmental training factors are going to influence you, and then it's going to be a struggle. Okay, but those things are changeable, and we do have control over them. We just have to learn to be aware and then learn what to do. And those are skills that we can learn and grow into. So what will help parents, or what will help people initiate the conversation around stigma? Understanding that there are some lifestyle factors, just like with heart disease, your exercise or your food intake, or what is the way you think about stress. Those kind of things are also going to affect your mental health, and you have control over them. And then recognizing that there's a degree of you don't have control over it, so you can't, part of the problem is that we stigmatize people's lifestyle choices, and we say that they're a bad person because they've chosen to eat poorly or not exercise or not manage their thoughts and emotions well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So part of what this sounds like is, just as we have some guidelines for ways to stay physically healthy, about here's things that will, broadly speaking, be better for your physical health in terms of exercise, nutrition, sleep, that kind of thing. Connection, yeah. all those different pieces. Arguably, there's a similar set of baseline best practices for our mental health that's a starting point for us to be able to say,
absolutely.
Right? And, just like physical health, if I look at that and go, wow, I'm eating half a pound of sugar every day, that's probably a bad thing. There should be an equivalent set of things that we can look at and say, oh, wow, you know what? I'm doing this particular thing, which is pushing me down a path to a negative mental outcome.
Right. So for sure, looking at people's behaviors and understanding where they undermine their goals, right, their long-term health or their long-term stability or their long-term well-being, is a place to start. And teaching people those kinds of preventative behaviors is part of mental wellness.
Right.
So if you think of this as like a skills-based approach to mental wellness, teaching good, it's physical health, but it's effectively brain chemistry. Healthy brain chemistry, behaviors and habits will support good mental wellness, but it's not the only thing.
Right.
There's definitely a lot of other things involved, including how you manage your emotions and how you manage your thoughts. Mm-hmm. The idea that we can manage our emotions and our thoughts is a little bit of a mystery to people. I think currently people still feel that there's, that there's a lack of ability to control our emotions. Emotions just happen to us. And part of that is true. Our initial emotions to a situation are very, they're not really within our control. They just happen. They're spontaneous. And yet, that's the initial reaction. We can continue that emotion, or we can choose to change it given the skills and the awareness to do that.
Right.
So we may have a first reaction, and then our secondary emotion, we can change that.
And based on what we know and what we understand, even that first reaction can be impacted
over time.
Over time.
Yep. We develop better habits, and so our knee-jerk reaction becomes something more useful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. People that, I always use the analogy of people that are really comfortable in the water, when they fall in the water, it's not a big deal. However, somebody like my mom who never learned how to swim, for her, falling in the water is definitely a different kind of a negative event.
Very stressful. Yeah.
Yeah. So we start this gateway. I mean, it sounds like an interesting starting point to all this is just to say, here's a set of things that are recommendations that will help your mental health as a baseline, kind of like we do with our physical health. You know, it's the same.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
Yes. And okay, we like to say that we don't have the same kind of stigma in physical health as we do in mental health, and that's not actually true. That's the reason why we have this concept of fat shaming, right?
Right.
The idea that someone is fat because they behave poorly is a stigmatizing viewpoint of a fundamental truth, which is the behavior that the person is engaging in undermines their well-being.
Right.
And yet it's not that they're necessarily doing it intentionally to ensure the undermining of their well-being. You know, there's some other kind of emotional or other drivers that cause them to do that behavior, not just I don't care, I'm too lazy, I'm not willing, you know. There's it's a complex thing.
Right.
Human behavior is complex.
Human behavior is very complex. Yeah, and I think, you know, for this conversation, really, it's not about having the perfect solution. It's about what is the
improvements.
Yeah, what are the tiny improvements? And you know, mental health is a complex conversation, and anything that's an improvement is better than nothing. Is kind of my mental model, right?
Yes, and that's great for marketing and not necessarily great for longer term success, right? It's kind of a black and white, and you know how I get about black and white responses, right? Anything that's good and moves us forward is better than nothing, right? Often, and if we get caught up in that one anything and we exclude other things, or we focus on, you know, that one thing is the best thing, or is sufficient, or is, you know, is the way, then that discounts the complexity of the situation.
Yeah, fair enough. So I guess to clarify that, what I mean is that any starting point is a good starting point. It's kind of like, and if you want to take care of your physical health, if your starting point is getting more exercise, great. Knowing that there's other things you need to do. If your starting point is figuring out how to change your eating habits, great. Knowing that there's other things that you need to do. It's a multivariable equation.
It is.
And it's often way too hard to start working on 3 variables at the same time, but we can start on one.
Yeah, right. I mean, if the idea is that you can take small bites at a big problem, or climb a mountain with baby steps, and that for sure is a way to look at it. It's definitely a useful model to look at it. So what are some of the baby steps that we can take with stigma? As a society, we're trying to increase talking about it, so it's not like just brushed under the carpet, right? Hidden in the closet.
Right.
Talking about it is a useful thing, and just talking about it is not sufficient, and it serves to the unintended consequence of giving people a platform to talk about mental health is that they get attention for having mental health issues, which can sometimes encourage people to talk about it more because they receive attention for it. It needs to be balanced, because that's important, and it needs to be balanced with, all right, so what can we do to reduce those issues? What can we do to help you so that you don't suffer as much from those issues, without taking attention away from the person, because then that's kind of like punishing them. When they improve, they get less attention, so that's a form of punishment, right? It's ironic and a little bit perverse, but it's true.
And the flip side to it is that they can then become more successful in other parts of their life
and get more attention in other areas that are more positive.
And because sooner or later, the amount of attention you're going to get because of the problem you have is going to peak and then decrease.
It may. It depends on how we, if that's our focus as a society and we feel that, drawing attention to the problem is the place to be, then there's a lot of attention going on there. There's a lot of attention going on right now. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm only saying that we can't stop there.
Right. No, it needs to be, there's a problem, and
so what do we help
what do we
them
do?
with?
Yeah, how do we help people to solve that problem, to move forward, and to recognize that talking about it is only the first step to climb the mountain. You can't, you have to get beyond that.
Right.
And I think that...
Well, I mean, that's the whole reason why we developed the HEART program, was because my experience in hospital was that, yes, it's important to be able to talk about the problem that you have or the issues that are contributing to this mental health problem, and what helps us move forward includes learning skills to manage our stress response, manage our physical experience, manage our emotional response and our emotional experience, manage our cognitive, our thoughts that we respond to in a particular situation, and then control them, going forward, so that we're pushing ourselves in the direction we want to go, as opposed to being pushed by these things that kind of happen spontaneously to us and are like subject to whatever's going on around us, right? That we become more like masters of our own, drivers of our own direction, as opposed to being a candle blown in the wind.
Right.
So that's the reason why we have this skills-based approach. Yeah.
Right, and I think the skills-based is because those skills are applicable across a wide variety of contexts. To me, that's part of the easy starting point.
Yes.
Is you learn these skills because, we talk about them some in the mental health context, but we also talk about them in the how to be successful in all these other parts of your life context.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right, and what we need to do is to highlight the fact that these skills are transferable, and it's not just something that you do in one situation.
Right. Oh,
that there's, a process that you can apply the same skill to multiple situations and improve your performance, your response across the board.
Right.
And improve your wellness across the board, as opposed to just in one area. And that's really part of the benefit of the skills-based approach, because when you can define a skill and say, clearly describe what it is, how you use it, when you use it, you can then start picking apart situations and figuring out where else you can apply that skill.
Right.
Not just in the one situation that you learned to do it in. So it's not just a unique response to a situation. It's actually a skill-based response.
Right. Yeah. And from anecdotally interviewing people that are struggling, it seems like frequently the reason they struggle is they don't have the skills. And this is one of the things that you commented on early when we first started talking about this, was how, you saw this almost binary where people who had the skills, if you have a skill, then it's not a struggle. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the skill, then it is a struggle. So, it's the back to swimming, right? If you know how to swim, then going in the pool and playing around is not a big deal. But if you don't know how to swim, you're staying out in the driveway someplace as far from the swimming pool as you can get.
Or maybe the only time you can go in is with the support of, a raft or armed buddies. And if you come off of that, you're nervous and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or you keep yourself in the kiddie pool that's only shin deep. Yeah. I think that's helping people to get beyond that into more self-empowered states.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think part of that is the opposite of being stuck in stigma is being self-empowered. That's the flip, right? If you can talk about something and you're comfortable talking about something and there is no stigma in your mind around it, then you're self-empowered.
Yes. And that process, what you're describing is like self-advocating out of stigma, which is important for individuals. And it's also hard for individuals who are dealing with mental health issues because, they're obviously in a disadvantaged state. And so it behooves the rest of society to look for ways to help them. But it's twofold. It's not just one or the other. It's not just the individual. It's not just the society. It's a combination.
Right. Yeah, totally. We operate as a group culture, and we need to be...
Well, it's a holistic thing, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to cover in this conversation?
No, I think this is great for now.
Okay, good. So, folks, thank you very much. We appreciate your ears. As we mentioned, so we're a mental wellness consultancy, and if that piques your curiosity and you're wondering how we can help you, by all means, reach out to us. Our email is hello@heartprogram.com, HAERT program.com. Yes, we did flip the vowels.
Yeah, and you can check us out at our website, heartprogram.com, obviously, HAERT program. And thanks for engaging, and see you next time.
Thank you.